Welcome to The Third Story. I'm your host, Leo Sidran. Today's conversation features singer, songwriter, and guitarist Camila Meza. Camila grew up in Santiago, Chile. She was born just at the end of the Pinochet dictatorship, but she really came of age in this kind of new era of cultural opening in the 1990s, in which the music from the United States, specifically jazz and fusion, was entering from the north. She remembers watching bootleg videotapes of masterclasses and concerts that her siblings brought in. See, they were musicians already when she was growing up, and she just wanted to be part of the clan, she said. She just wanted to learn how to talk like a musician so she could be part of the conversation that her siblings were having. But at the same time, in that period in the 1990s of opening in Chile, of cultural awakening, the sounds of Chilean folklore were also reemerging after years of having been repressed under the dictatorship. She wanted to be one of these serious musicians that she saw around her. Her father, her siblings, they took music very seriously, and she understood that if she wanted to play music, she had to take it seriously too. I mean, really seriously. Like she said to me, if you wanted to be a composer, you had to be better than Mozart. If you're not going to be able to do that, you might as well not do it at all. And that was the mentality. Camila chose the electric guitar, which was an unusual choice for a young Chilean girl. There was no reference, she told me. And even today, there are very few references, both as a guitarist and really as a woman in jazz. Today, however, there is an awakening. She told me we're seeing a specific moment in jazz of new awareness of who we listen to, not only in today's music, but throughout the history of the music. And Camila Meza is part of that new awareness. We got together recently to talk about the nature of all these questions: translation, improvisation, self-observation, identity, playing on a cruise ship, and synesthesia. I mean, it was all over the place. It was a conversation that was very wide and deep at the same time. But another aspect of it that I want to speak to briefly is that we had this conversation a little over a week ago. We're just at the end of October now, and it's incredible what can happen in the space of a week. We started out in our conversation talking about the social and cultural atmosphere in Chile in the years immediately following the dictatorship of Pinochet. And Camila made a point of explaining that the country is still deeply divided politically. In the days that followed our meeting, Chile has experienced non-stop demonstrations, many of them violent, protesting the inequality in the country and moving the dial politically from the ground. So, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Third-story.com is the place to go for all your Third Story needs. As I often do, I have compiled a Spotify playlist for your listening enjoyment. It is related to our conversation, both in the music that Camila makes and also music that we talk about in the conversation, and it's definitely worth checking out. There's also some videos on the website that you can reference. Of course, all the links to the social, subscriptions, that kind of stuff, it's all there on the website. I do need to remind you that if you are picking up what I'm putting down here, one way to really support it is just by subscribing. If you go to the Apple Podcasts app and subscribe, it's really helpful. It really helps keep this thing growing, so I encourage you to subscribe. But that's not all, of course not. You know this. Patreon.com/thirdstorypodcast is the place to go to get involved on a deeper level, and I will, from time to time, give you a little bonus content. Today is no exception. I'm going to give you some bonus content. There's another, 5 or 10 minutes of chit-chat between me and Camila that didn't make the final edit, but it's tied very closely to a series of conversations that have been going on since day one here, namely, where to live and how long are we going to survive in New York. This is a conversation that I think probably goes back to the first episode. Why New York? What about New York? Where else are we going to go? Is this still a place that we want to be? Why can't we leave? Why can't we stay? We can't stay. We can never leave. Well, Camila's got her own version of that story, and it's worth exploring as a patron. It's there for you. Finally, for those of you wondering about the situation with the Woody Goss interview that was mysteriously posted and then taken down on the same day a few weeks ago, it is coming together, and I'm still quite optimistic that I'll be able to repost it for you by the end of the month. I can't make any guarantees, and currently it's in the hands of a funk tribunal that is carefully combing through it for hidden messages and coded phraseology, but it is looking good. I'll continue, of course, to keep you abreast of the developments as they unfurl. And now, my conversation with Camila Meza. Camila Meza, nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Do people call you Meza in English?
Meza, yes.
Meza, Camila Meza.
Sometimes I get Camila Meza. No, it's Camila Meza.
If somebody calls you Camila, do you feel like they're calling your American identity? And if they call you Camila, is it like the original Camila?
Right. That's the way that we would pronounce it in Latin America, just
Yes.
Camila. But it's so close to the American version, I really don't have any problem with the American pronunciation either.
You have a long life now in America. You've been here for years.
10 years. Yeah,
so
exactly 10
a
years.
large part of your adult life has been spent in America.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, close to 1/3 of my life. And definitely most of my adult life. Yeah.
But I'm really interested in hearing about where you were before you came here, what it was like in Chile before you came here. I mean, you were born in the last years of a dictatorship.
Yes, which is strange because, you know, around those last 5 years, right, things were still happening, like atrocities were still happening, but very hidden and not in a full light, you know? And so I came to the realization later in life that, you know, like I was raised in a neighborhood where just like 2 blocks away, there was like a torture house. So it's kind of creepy to think it that way. At the same time, having most of my conscious childhood being out from dictatorship, you know, it was later on that I started really, really, really coming to realize all these things, you know. People, they just want to move on when they've lived stuff like that. They just like, okay, no more talking about it or no more.
So was it not something that people would talk about? They wouldn't talk about the dictatorship?
I think yes, but at the same time, it depends on who, you know, and in which circles. And in Chile, because of that history, it's a very divided country in a sense,
Still.
you know? Yeah, you have a polarized political visions. I remember even like talking with my friends when we were really young, and some of them would come from families that would be for Pinochet, and some of them would come from families that had family members that were detained and tortured, you know,
and disappeared.
and disappeared. So it's convoluted, you know. It's a very convoluted history for sure.
It's not really fair to make the comparison. Nobody has been disappeared or tortured, but it's hard to have this conversation today and not think about what's happening in the United States.
I unfortunately have to agree with you. Yes, it is. America is living a time where, you know, it seems kind of familiar in a way, right? You're right, not in the exact same way, but still, you know, when you think about the different layers of society and the different upbringings that, like, you know, the American society, certain parts of American society have experienced, you could see that, you know, we're learning a lot of like the differences and also hopefully what unite us, you know?
Well, when you describe that Chile is politically divided still, that there's still two very distinct visions of how it should be organized, that feels extremely reminiscent of what's going on in the States.
Yeah, but you know what is interesting to me? That, well, first of all, when I came to America 10 years ago, coming from Chile, politics, it's something that it's normal to talk about, you know? I remember trying to have political conversations with like friends from college, you know, around, people that were either a little bit younger, but around my age, you know, like 22 years old, whatever. And it seemed to me that everybody was so out of touch with what was going on. You know, I was like, I would ask questions like, what do you think about the Iraq war? Or what do you think about this and that? And it felt that most kids were like, I don't know, like, it kind of doesn't interest me. And that left an impression in me because for us, it was impossible not to be aware.
Yeah.
But fast forward 10 years after America today, I don't think there's any party or any, you know, tour or any moment that we don't talk about what's going on, you know? And people are, I feel like The positive aspect of it is that people are actually taking, not, I mean, I don't know if control is the word, but they're starting to participate.
Yes, ownership. Yeah.
Ownership, that's
Yeah.
the word that I was
Yeah.
looking for. Yeah, America has been very dormant politically,
Yes.
at least in a mainstream way. There's people that have always also had to be constantly aware and have had to be in constant fight, you know. But right now it seems that it's part of the mainstream.
Yes.
You know?
Well, it takes a crisis sometimes.
Yeah.
So as you say, you grew up primarily in outside of the dictatorship. It had ended in 1990.
Yeah.
And you were like 5 or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So what was the cultural vibe like in Chile? What were people into?
Again, it would depend on even like the neighborhood you grew up, you know. There was a segment of society that was absolutely looking outwards, you know, to the world. And we were starting, I guess, to have this really, really big influence of foreign trends, you know. The radio was so much, you know, music in English. And so that was one side of it. And then the other one, it's also trying to revive, you know, what had been lost during dictatorship, which is the folklore, you know, because Pinochet, that's one of the things that he actually did. He actually burnt the recordings of all these legends, you know. Yeah, so like there's a part of society that it's like focused on that. In the case of certain songwriters that are emblematic, you know, to our history, they were also very politically driven as well, you know. Someone like Victor Jara, he was part of the Communist Party, and he was singing from the perspective of, you know, social inequality and kind of calling on the weaknesses of society. And so that was a threat.
Was Brazilian music, was that present in Chile, or is that present in you, but not necessarily in Chile?
Yeah, you know what? I've been trying to make a little bit of tracing back, like how did I get to all this, you know? Because I don't think it's a mainstream music, you know, in Chile. Like people know a little bit about Brazilian music. They would obviously know what bossa nova is, all this, and then we would dance to some like popular samba songs, but it's not music that everybody would know, like all the authors and everything. So in my case, tracing back, I think I realized that my digging really deep into it was thanks to jazz. Thanks to getting into jazz music, you're like literally like one step away from all these like fusions that they made, you know, like bossa nova. And yeah, they share so much like harmonic language that I guess that was my route, you know, which is odd in a way because I had to go north to go back south.
Totally. It doesn't surprise me at all, though. And what you remember the sort of cultural language of the 1990s in Chile being, it really is as if you were describing the cultural language of Brazil in the 1950s. It's like American influence and indigenous influence coming together and trying to find something. And here you are trying to find some common ground between them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So were you listening to jazz? Did anybody listen to jazz around you? Had you ever seen a jazz musician as a young person?
Yeah, my story is kind of weird. It's like a puzzle in a way. It's not really like one day I heard this and that changed my life. No, it was like, so there's a mixture from what I can remember between my dad being a super music lover, you know, and very curious, and he would, you know, he would have a lot of CDs at home and we would listen, you know, overhear a lot of music.
Was he a musician?
He was a musician when he was, he went to college for music and everything. He kind of dropped it in the middle. That's a whole other story. But yeah, but he's a musician, you know, like not someone that dedicated his life to music, but definitely a musician, amazing ears. I always have this memory of like going on car rides. I mean, traveling to like our vacations and him putting like symphonies and literally singing every note of Mozart, like symphonies or Beethoven. He's just like a super geek, especially of classical music. But then I do remember like hearing some jazz through my dad, like that. But I think the biggest influence in that sense was my older brother, because he is a drummer, and he started really like digging into this experimental fusion jazz rock world that was getting really strong in Chile during the 90s. I guess I don't really know how it was being imported, but my brother started like getting all these VHSs, videos of like clinics and like, you know, and concerts. And I have this memory also of my brother hanging out with my older sister. She's also a musician. She's a singer-songwriter.
Are you the youngest of?
I'm the middle of these two sisters, and my brother is the oldest. So my sister at that time was learning bass. So she was super into like Jaco Pastorius, and they were checking out all these musicians like Chick Corea and John Scofield, Vinny Colaiuta. You know, Pat Metheny came in that mix too. And with my sister, we would share a room. So they would put these videos and start talking about these musicians. And all what I heard was like, oh yeah, have you checked Wurzel's World? Oh my God, he's amazing. Like I wouldn't understand the names, but all I wanted to be is to know.
Be able to be part of that conversation.
Exactly, yeah, because it was so fun. Like I wanted to know, and I wanted to talk music like that, you know? And so I started kind of digging a little bit that way.
But really, in part so that you could keep up with your siblings.
Totally. That's what you do when you're like a kid and you have siblings. You want to be part of the clan, you know? So then, you know, having kind of overheard jazz and improvisation, and also seeing my older brother taking like the practice of music so seriously, I would see him having this little notebook where he would write how many hours he practiced a day. And I would open it like kind of like, oh my God, let's see. 10 hours, 14 hours. He was like such a nerd, and I admired that. For some reason, I was like, I want to be that. I want to like really learn music this deep, you know? So fast forward, I kind of, I sort of started like getting more into rock music, actually, before I really dug into jazz. I started like listening to Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and, you know, Queen, all these rock bands.
And were you playing guitar yet?
Yeah, for some reason I wanted to play the electric guitar. There were acoustic guitars around, which I had already like played, but I didn't want to do that. I want to play the electric.
And was that a thing that a girl would be seen doing in Chile in 1995?
Oh no, I was totally. First of all, like I honestly I didn't have any reference in that sense. You know, I later came to kind of like meet. Well, I saw this. What's her name? So I forget.
There's still very few references.
Yeah, but on rock, like I remember seeing, maybe I'm wrong, Jennifer Batten or something. This guitar player that played with Michael Jackson.
Oh yeah. I know who she is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was, oh my God! But that came so later on, you know. And for a long time, you know, like all these years, starting to play rock guitar as a teenager. There were so many people like, oh, how did you get it? Why are you interested in this? It's like so rare and so, but kind of made me feel like, you know, like I like doing something that nobody's doing right now.
Right. You know, you mentioned Pat Metheny in passing, but after you had gone through discovering rock and getting into rock, I mean, I can see how Metheny could be a bridge. I think he has been a bridge for a lot of people.
So he appeared, and then I remember, you know, having these rock guitars, you know, like an Ibanez, and I would play with distortion a lot and all this. And then suddenly I heard Pat Metheny's, you know, acoustic sound, and I was, whoa, okay, so what is this? Because it just really made such a big impression on me. I was like, I want to play with this sound first, and also I want to know what he's doing, because like, honestly, there was so little knowledge about jazz in my first years of music that I didn't know that they were improvising, you know? I thought that they would just learn these lines, and like, when I discovered that it was improvised, it blew my mind. I was like, oh, on top, these guys are creating in the moment, are you kidding? Okay, that was like a realization for me, you know, like I need to do this. And researching a little bit, this is what I think it's fascinating is that when you start going into the depths of a musician, you start learning like what influenced them and everything. And then, you know, in an interview, I might have heard like Wes Montgomery.
Yes.
You know? And then I'm like, oh, okay, wait, who's Wes Montgomery? And synchronically speaking, I go into school to go and learn jazz, which I still kind of think I know, but I don't know what it is. And then a friend from a guitarist, a classmate in school, he gave me the incredible jazz guitar of Wes Montgomery. Mm-hmm. Another mind-blowing experience, you know. I was like, first of all, I made immediate connection. Like, okay, I can see how like Pat Metheny is related to this. Mm. And also this is such a deep music. It's funny. I went kind of like from modern to older, you know. And I think it's what like a lot of musicians like that are, you know, raised in the 90s did, because you get first, you know, like the popular sounding music, the popular sounding jazz music, and then you go back and and you find all this incredible tradition, which at that time it just made such an impression in me that I was okay. I just need to dive deep into this. You know?
I can imagine that being so far away from the source of where this music was coming from at a time when there was no internet, like you described these VHS cassettes being somehow imported into the country, and the material must have seemed so exotic to you in some way. Like, what is this? How do they learn this? And who are these people?
Absolutely. I think it was the beginning of, could it be Napster?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Napster?
Of course.
And I'm just now starting to realize the difference of today, you know, like how you can literally access anything right now, anything.
Is that good?
That's a good question. I mean, it has definitely changed the environment for sure.
Yeah.
The musical, even the way that we almost like listen to music, you know. We can develop that.
Yes, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that, yeah.
I think I was just nurtured by mentors, you know. I found a mentor in school. I guess he saw the potential of me kind of like really getting to understand this music and play it. Specifically, this teacher in school, a piano player, he also saw the vocalist in me, you know.
Did you see the vocalist in you at that point or not yet?
Honestly, I never thought that I was going to be a lead singer. You know, I had my bands and I would sing background vocals, and I always used my voice. You know, it wasn't, I was never shy about singing. I just didn't consider it as being like, I'm going to be this singer. And I was a guitarist, you know.
Did you see it as less serious to be a singer?
Not really. I guess maybe it was like my references at that point were mostly instrumentalists, you know. I loved vocal music, and actually when I was working with this band as a teenager, I would write music with lyrics, you know. So there was this part of me that conceived my music as having vocals, you know.
And what was that music like?
Ooh, it was so all over the place. It's hilarious. It's almost like today, which my music, it's like really, I think it's really hard to pinpoint like what style it is, but at that point it was even more all over the place. Like I would say I was really into, at that time I was super attracted to groove music. I did become part of some quote unquote soul bands in Chile. I loved rhythm guitar. I would just like, I could spend hours just like doing like funky guitars. Yeah, I also was writing songs. So
were you speaking English? Were you writing in English or trying to mimic the sounds of English?
I think most of our songs, our songs were in Spanish, But yeah, I guess like whenever I would write songs, and which is something that actually still happens, sometimes it's maybe because of the influences that I have in my head, you know, I'm writing a song and the way that I write, sometimes it's just like mumbling words, right?
Yeah.
So, and some songs would literally come out with like English sounding mumble
Yeah,
words,
yeah.
you know?
Yep.
And so sometimes I actually let it happen, you know?
Yeah, sure. You've been here 10 years. Are your dreams primarily in one language or another?
You talk about actual dreams?
Actual dreams, not
Or like
not fantasy,
metaphorical
not metaphorical too. But no, I mean, I just mean like if you dream in one language or another, it could inform kind of what your relationship is with that language at a certain time. Are you aware of it?
I'm aware for sure that I've had dreams in English where there's a conversation or there's, you know, circumstances happening and I'm thinking in English, which also happens in real life. Sometimes I'm actually talking to myself in my mind and I'm like, why are you doing this? You know? Which is weird. But I guess somehow it's become such a, you know, I sometimes I think that I'm during the course of a day, I'm almost using more English than Spanish sometimes.
It makes sense though. I mean, you're living in a primarily English environment.
Right. Although I do, you know, I have friends from Chile that I visit a lot, but yeah, it happens that way.
So when you write songs today, do you make a determination that you want to write it in English or in Spanish before you start, or are you following this mumble thing still?
I would say I follow.
You follow the mumble.
I follow the mumble and I also follow the music.
Do you think that there is some music that asks to be in one language and not in another?
So I can answer from an intuitive space and I would say yes.
Yeah.
Although I'm yet to come up with this very studied method because there might be a very scientific answer to that, you know, when it comes to music, rhythm, space, vowels, sounds.
Absolutely.
But right now it's in that intuitive space and yeah, it just tells me like, this is totally a Spanish song, you know?
For sure. I mean, one way to explore that question is through translation, right? Through singing songs that exist in 2 and 3 languages and see what happens to them musically. I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking about The Girl from Ipanema and how that changes in English and Portuguese, you know? You think rhythmically how it sings differently in one language and another.
Wow. There's also very kind of idiosyncratic sounds on each language that creates music too, you know? In Portuguese, for instance, like all the and, you know, it's kind of like also it's part of the groove. And so when you translate, you're sort of missing that like almost like a shaker aspect to the lyrics, you know?
I talked to Janice Siegel years ago about this, about translating from Portuguese into English, because with the Manhattan Transfer, they made a record of like primarily Javon songs years ago. And she said that the only way they could see to do it was to transcribe the sounds and try to find new English words that sounded similar, rather than translating the meaning of the words.
Oh, that's interesting.
With Portuguese, they actually tried to find English words that sounded similar. And maybe because of that same thing that you're describing.
That is super interesting. I'm curious to check out that specific record. I do have a little bit of an issue there.
Yeah.
That sometimes, which might be the reason why they do it this way, but there's a couple of songs that come, you know, top of my head, that the English translation is absolutely almost the opposite. Like I can think of Começar de Novo,
starting
which
over,
is The Island in English. It's a song by Ivan Lins, and Começar de Novo, which means start again. It's a really deep song, and it's a song about some kind of abusive relationship, you know? Like this person is leaving this abuser behind and saying, I'll start again. I'm not going to have you making me feel all this pain. And it's really harsh. And then The Island, it's like, it's this couple absolutely in love, reaching this point of like, and there's something missing for me there.
Well, this speaks to this question of what a song is, really, you know, in the sense that a song may be more than poetry set to music. You know, a song is the relationship, a song with words is the relationship between music and words and the way they inform one another.
Yeah.
And they mutually support one another.
Yeah.
And when you change the meaning, the song loses its integrity in that sense.
I agree.
Okay, so before we get too far lost down these questions, you eventually came to the United States. What led you away from Chile into New York eventually? What drew you here?
Music.
Yes. I mean, did you have that sense for a long time that you wanted to come here? You were working to come here? Or was there an event that indicated now is the time?
Yes. So there's several stages because I did have maybe a very, very kind of hidden desire as a musician to explore, endlessly, But
And did you have a sense that you could have stayed there? Was there a feeling like, oh, I could stay here, I could have a career here, I could be a musician here?
There was something that happened because I started, quote unquote, late, I'm a late bloomer, as they say. I kind of had a little bit of an issue with that. Like, oh my God, I need to catch up so much, like I started late, blah, blah.
Well, how late?
I started really studying music maybe 15 years old. I guess my dad, because coming from a classical world, he would have the conception of if you didn't start at 4, then you're done. You cannot have a career, Luckily, I didn't pay attention to that. So at the very beginning of all of this, beginning years, I was I knew how much I needed to study, and so for all at least 6 years, I knew that I had so much to learn from musicians in Chile, I knew that I had so much to experience there. So during all that time, there was nothing telling me you need to get this knowledge somewhere else, because you have it here. But with that said, there was a moment that something started tickling in me, Also my a little bit of a curiosity of what's going on somewhere else in the world.
Had you traveled? Had you left?
So the first actual travel was I went to play in a cruise ship.
Ah,
yeah.
That's a great way to see
actually,
things.
Because I basically had to play 6 days a week for 3 hours in front of an audience, and to develop my repertoire like crazy, because you don't want to play 10 songs for all that time. So I remember, I was playing between Latin American music, jazz, standards.
Singing in English now, starting to sing in English.
Exactly, yeah.
And learning phonetically the sounds.
When I started working in this cruise ship, there were a couple of years that I had already been working on this kind of repertoire.
Yeah.
So, but to your point, yes, the very beginning of my, singing jazz, I was singing absolutely by memory, not really understanding the words.
I mean, it's just, I've had that experience over the years of hearing somebody sing almost impeccable English, and then you speak to them and you realize that they have no English. They just know these sounds,
Yeah, a funny anecdote though, there was this really old, incredible connoisseur of jazz in Chile that had met everybody, when Wynton Marsalis came there, he was the one who would host them and stuff. We became really good friends, I would go and hear records at his place, and he came to one of my gigs around this time that we're talking about, and I was singing standards, and then I played Stormy Weather, and I was like, let's do it with my band, let's do this arrangement, and then I'm like, 1, 2, don't know why. After the concert, he's like, Camila, do you know what Stormy Weather is about? And I'm like, I think so. It's a really sad song, and you're playing it as the brightest thing. Yeah. And so I learned on stage basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, so after a few years,
I mean, that's actually connected to your question of earlier, your issue about changing the meaning of a song, If the lyrics and the music aren't sympathetic, it doesn't have the same power, a song,
Absolutely. Yeah, but it's funny that when you're so focused on the music layer, that you're missing all this other, And it took me a while to actually connect this these things, and which made, once I started really exercising this, it made my music so much deeper.
Yes. So you reached a point after being on this cruise ship where you thought, I think I'm ready to leave.
So there's one more stage, which is basically I saved a lot of money on this.
Good stage.
Yeah. And then I want to go to New York just to check it out, But still, there wasn't a real concrete image in my head, I'm going there to move, I was just curious of what was all of this about, that what is the Village Vanguard? I know it in the name of a record, but I don't know what it is. And
Which record did you know it from?
Bill Evans. And Coltrane.
Yeah.
So I spent like a month and a half right after that cruise ship in New York. It was summer of 2008. And that was it, because I basically also took it as a very overall cultural trip, you know. I went to all the museums, I went to all the outdoor festivals, I went to everything that I really absorbed, like the creative scene of New York and I would literally don't sleep to go to like 3 concerts a day. Like I was obsessed. And so...
What did you make of the music that you've discovered here? What did you make of the scene?
First of all, that it was so diverse, you know. Second, that there was so much happening all the time at the same time, that there was like no moment where you would be like, we'd have nothing to do here, you know? Like there was always something to be inspired by. And also, I guess that the level was so high that like there wouldn't be any possibility for you to not try to achieve that for yourself as well.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think when people see that level and experience it for the first time, you know, there's a few reactions that one might have.
Yeah.
And one of them would be to say, that's a tall mountain to climb. And
yeah.
The other one would be, I can't wait to climb that mountain.
Yeah. The thing is that the mountain, I learned this very early on in my life. The mountain is not their mountain. It's your own. So what I was seeing in all of these amazing musicians is how they had climbed their own mountain to achieve that greatness. So I was at the beginning of my own mountain, you know? What I saw is, even if my mountain is smaller than theirs, I want to be at the top of my own mountain, you know? So, which in a way it's hard to really embody, because you compare yourself with everybody, right? Like, oh my God, this guy can play so much and this other person has all this going on, blah, blah, blah. But I guess I made that commitment to myself very early on, because it was one of these ghosts that I think maybe it was passed on to me, you know? Like the idea that if you wanted to be a composer, you had to be better than Mozart, you know? If you're not going to be able to do that, you might as well not do it.
But who passed that on to you?
My dad, of course. Yeah. And it's funny, because after all these years, I almost, like, I am grateful having to go through that kind of self-observance so early, you know?
But do you still experience it that way?
Yeah. I mean, I experience it in the way that, like, I compare my process to myself, you know? Like, I obviously look for inspiration, and it's the same idea that I'm talking about, that I go out to see all these amazing musicians to find that drive. But that drive, I lead it towards, like, keep digging deeper into my own
yourself.
Artistry. Yeah.
It requires an enormous amount of self-awareness.
Absolutely.
To be able to do that. I think this idea of why be a composer if you're not going to be as great or greater than Mozart is so overpowering to me, in the sense that I would become totally paralyzed if I asked that of myself every time I tried to do something. But on the other hand, I think what I'm hearing you say is my inner Mozart, like whatever the best version of myself is, that's what I mean by Mozart.
Absolutely. And that also takes some courage to really observe yourself and start knowing what are your strengths, you know? What is it that really moves you, you know?
What happens if you discover that your strengths are not necessarily the things that you would like to be the strongest in? I think sometimes we have an idea of what we want to be, and then we have a recognition of what we are.
I think it's a process. Yeah. I don't think it would just from one day to another, you would be in total acceptance, you know? But I feel like once you start creating that connection, that part that you don't still see as being something worth looking at, once you give it a little bit of attention, start blooming. So there's something there that it will just open up and grow and start like being even more beautiful than what you even imagined, you know?
So did you bring all of those influences that you had been sort of nurturing at home, did you bring all of those with you to the music that you were making in New York when you first moved here?
My first years in New York, I was still sort of like trying to find exactly where I stood, you know, musically. I had so many interests, and at the same time, you know, I felt that I was proficient at certain things, you know, maybe exactly what we were talking about, you know. Back home, at the very beginning of my music career, I was mostly known for like singing swing, you know, singing like super straight ahead. I still love to do that, you know. There was something, a little bit of a process of really kind of amplifying my vision of what I could do with that same approach, because basically playing standards, what gave to me was this freedom, this idea that like you can just play the same song in 15 million ways, you know, and every time you go to the stage, it's gonna be different, you know, and that's what really attracted me to it. And so then suddenly there's this realization that there's, you know, you can basically do that with any song. And yeah, what I was looking for is that freedom. I started getting also deeper into arranging, kind of reharmonizing, you know. I was learning more about harmony. I was playing around with, you know, experimenting with songs and trying to really develop my own taste too, because it was just a fun thing to do, you know, like play a song and see, like change the chords and see, well, how do you feel about that when, you know, when you just change the bass even, you know.
Would you say that your music was more sort of traditionally swinging before you came here and maybe infused with more folklore and South American elements after you got here?
So during the transition, I actually released an album in 2009 with my Chilean band, but I had already moved, but I had all that repertoire going on, and we had already had like gigs and concerts there. Yeah, that was part of a transition, you know.
And that record you sing in English and in Spanish. That record has still starting to have both of that fusion, right?
Exactly. It's called Retrato. I basically did this experiment of literally taking any song I loved, including a Led Zeppelin song, and just totally redo it to my own environment, musical environment, you know. Yeah, and it was super fun. It actually, you know, that I think that's a little bit of the path that led me to also, you know, start having more confidence in writing my own music, you know, because I started developing a sound.
Yes. Well, that leads me to your new record, to Ambar, that continues to pull 5 records into the future, repertoire that's both yours and classic repertoire from other people and less well-known songs, to the point where, at least my experience of listening to it was constantly consulting to see whose song it was, having no concept of whose song it is, and discovering that, you know, a song that I thought maybe was yours was a David Bowie song, and then discovering a song that I was absolutely convinced was not yours and finding out that it was yours.
That's amazing.
So I think that it works in the sense that once it's been pulled into your universe, it sort of all belongs to you, and that's what one probably hopes for in that case.
Right. I guess today, the way that I just interact with all of these scenarios is literally just following that intuition of like, whatever moves you, it will be, you know, what you are in a musical way, you know? Like that song that you're talking about, David Bowie, Pat Metheny, the original version is super far from, you know, but there's something that drove me to, you know, sing it as a ballad.
It's called This Is Not America. When is it from?
I think from 1985, actually.
Because to sing This Is Not America, for an immigrant to sing This Is Not America in the age of Donald Trump.
Blossom fails to bloom this season. Promise not to stare too long, for this is not America. A little piece of you, the little piece in me will die, for this is not America. There was a time, a wind that blew so pure, for this could be the biggest sky, and I could have the faintest idea, for this is not America. It was written for a movie, and the scene is totally the opposite. It's this characters going into Mexico and being treated absolutely different.
Oh, say, this isn't America anymore. Oh, I see. You're not in Kansas anymore.
Right. But then when you do that, you put it in context of we're singing it today, the lyrics just like show the light of what's happening.
Yes.
And it's weirdly super relevant.
The other song of yours on the record that poses some questions is the song of All Your Colors. Do you experience music visually?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Do you experience synesthesia?
I don't know if it's actual synesthesia, but I do have a weird thing that I see tonalities, for instance. I see them with colors. You know, D major is orange, and I when I play it on the guitar, I see orange. Or A major is red. Sometimes chords also have colors, like B minor, 7/11, it's totally yellow, you know? And so it's weird because it doesn't have, I don't know if even synesthesia has a specific logic. I am unaware of it, but I do see colors. And I also see colors in instruments. For instance, like Rhodes.
You love Rhodes.
I love it. I love it. The sound of Rhodes, for me, it's like pastels. Do you know, do you say that way?
Pastels.
Like pastels, like pink and light blue. Yeah.
So harmony is made up of a combination of essentially of overtones that react with each other, and they can react in a dissonant way, or they can respond in a pretty way, or what we perceive as pretty, and color can combine in a similar way. You take primary colors and you combine them, and they make richer colors.
Yeah.
Now, you can also combine colors in an ugly way and make ugly colors.
Yeah.
Do you experience complex harmony in the same way that we would experience a complex combination of colors? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. I think I know what to talk about. And the answer is, I'm not sure. Because like when I'm listening to, let's say, a combination of sounds that like it creates some dissonance in me.
Do you see color then?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Yeah.
You see certain things as a pure color.
Yeah.
But you don't see them as
a canvas,
sort of, as a canvas
with like a painting. No.
Like your shirt right now is filled with all of these shapes and colors, but you don't necessarily visualize music that way.
No. There's like particular things that have a very, very strong color.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't see like a painting. Yeah. Although I love painting so much. The video of All Your Colors was made by my sister. I was so obsessed with like trying to do that, what you're talking about, just like, you know, mixing the colors and like creating sort of this movement that was sort of, you know, emulating that. Yeah.
And I think this gives us a chance to talk about something that we started to talk about earlier, which is how we experience music visually, maybe more now than ever.
Yeah. Kind of back to that idea that like times have changed so much, you know. I kind of don't blame people, you know, like, because there's something very human about like receiving information through light. And also because I have always been attracted to visual arts. I grew up watching videos from the artists that I loved. You know, at that time you could only wait for them on MTV. You know, it'd be like the fifth hour. Come on, can you put that Björk song, please? You know, but let's say an artist like Björk, her music is also, you know, her visual concept, and I see that not as a superficial thing that you could have that too, where like you're just selling your image, you know, for commercial reasons. But I really admire when those concepts are artfully and purposefully put together.
Do you think that it's a different experience for women, female artists, and male artists?
When I think of, let's say, the stratosphere of music, that there's an absolute connection between the image and the music, which is mostly the pop world.
Yes.
Men and women kind of like everybody's in marketing the whole thing. What I do think is that in those platforms as well, you do have, like, it seems that the female figure has been historically more objectified. I mean, it's a very strange time, because also it seems that people are literally communicating mostly with image.
Yes.
And it's hard for people that are just not comfortable.
I know.
I mean, you would say that I am someone that I am comfortable, because I make video clips, and I have no problem making a photo shoot. Like maybe I've done it enough that I'm like not awkward anymore.
Yeah.
But still, like, the contemporary platforms demand so much of us in that regard that it can totally get super tiring.
Yeah. Right. Well, and it becomes in its best iteration, its best version, it becomes part of artful creation.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in its ugliest version, as you say, it can be either objectifying or it can just be awkward. I mean,
yeah.
You put all this time into playing guitar and all this time into singing and all this time into writing and arranging and thinking creatively about what you're presenting. And then on top of it, it's like, and what's your image? And what's your, and what are you thinking visually? And and both are true, because it can be quite creative. I mean, it depends what kind of person you are.
I think musicians probably have struggled with this forever. I don't think it's a new thing. It's probably, even when, in the era of like big record deal, labels, probably was the same thing. I mean, if you go back and see some of, some covers of, jazz legends, even, you're like, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
Like, there's some amazing singers that like have covers that I'm like, whoa, I don't think you decided to do that.
That album cover.
Yeah.
Tell me about Björk. Tell me about what Björk meant to you and what inspired you about her.
Yeah. My mom is a journalist, and she worked on a TV station for a long time. She would receive this, like, the new records, they would pass it on to her. And then one of them one day she brought Vespertine by Björk. And we had already known Björk, but that album, I remember being like, before and after my life, I think it's one of the records that probably I've listened to the most in my life. It's a mixture between the unexpectedness of herself, the irreverence, her also making music that literally just sounds like Björk. I think Björk is a style, Björk is not an artist. She's a style at this point, I keep admiring, like, every year, and then she's such a geeky artist. Like, you see that she's so dedicated to her art and her craft. And sometimes I even ask myself, like, whoa, how can so complex music, some of her music is absolutely like so edgy that I can't believe that it's mainstream, And so I'm always impressed at her, like, ability to open up doors of accessibility.
Yes.
For people to really go and listen to really high quality music.
I hear you say Björk is not a genre, is her own genre. She belongs to no genre. And you said earlier something that I agree with, that your music is hard to categorize. I mean, not only you, I think a lot of people of your generation are kind of living in the world of jazz and bringing a lot of jazz language and values enough that you're a jazz artist. You're in the jazz community and tied deeply to the tradition of jazz. There's a part of me that thinks that's of great benefit to you, because it's a community and it links you to a tradition, and it allows you to have improvisation but it also, there's a whole other aspect of what you're doing that is not necessarily, could be defined as something else. I don't know what it is. Singer-songwriter, world music.
Yeah, I agree. And it's true that it has both sides in terms of being beneficial or not, because I definitely cherish so much the idea of being part of a community of musicians. Like, first, because it's a beautiful community, and second, because there's a mindset to it that I just feel comfortable around people that are in the music because of the music. You know, that's like mostly what I feel from the jazz world, is that it's just like, it's people that are so huge music lovers that they're nerds.
Yes.
You know, and that's the place where I find myself being more nurtured and happy and motivated, you know. At the same time, yes, I have all this amount of curiosity and love for the other traditions of the world, like, you know, folklore from other parts of the world, especially, you know, my part of the world. There's so much to be studied, discovered, experienced, and I would never consider myself a folklorist, because I can't see myself perpetuating a form.
Yeah.
My spirit always kind of wants to reinvent things.
Yeah.
And learn from I think folklorists are necessary, you know. Someone needs to keep it, you know, but I'm not that person.
Right. Well, that's why I asked you earlier if your music and your approach became sort of more South American when you moved here. It happens among immigrant artist communities where once they're away and they have some context and some distance from where they came from, they say, oh, maybe there's a way to integrate that.
Yeah, well, I see it as when you can see something from a distance, you can see it better.
Yes.
You know, like all the things that have been so familiar and so, like, you know, you take them for granted, you know?
Right. But also maybe you see them as less available to play with. Maybe you're able to break some rules from far away.
That also. In my case, I think just like being so far away and then suddenly also kind of being in front of so many people from different cultures, it makes you question, who am I? You know, it makes you go deep and start observing yourself and start, you know, kind of also cherishing who you are, part of.
Yeah.
I don't think that all of what you are is where you come from, you know?
Yeah.
I do think that, like, our experiences in life absolutely, like, inform our being. And as I said before, things that you love are you as well. And it's absolutely possible that, like, someone from America will be even more in love with Chilean folklore than I am.
Yes.
You know? And it's how we are as humans. And it's beautiful because in my case, it's a big mixture of, like, love and attention for different types of music.
Yes.
And in the case of Chilean and Latin American music, it's just like kind of experimenting with it and bringing it because I love it and because it's part of, like, my familiar place put into this context of experimentation.
Does it make you feel closer to a part of yourself that or your family or your life that you left behind? Does it connect you to that? Is that part of it?
Yeah. Also because there's certain repertoire and certain, I guess, rhythms or, you know, melodic lines that, they're just, like, so imprinted and so ingrained in yourself that, like, I would hear even, like, for instance, like an Argentinian samba, samba
with a Z, yeah.
And it would make me nostalgic, you know? I would feel like, kind of like, I want to go down there.
I want to go back. You know, I don't expect you to be a representative of anything or to necessarily speak to this, but for years, I mean, before Trump, before all of this craziness, there's been this conversation about Latino culture in America and how there's all of these people who speak Spanish and the relationship with Spanish in people's homes is expanding. And I've always thought that it's a complicated question because it's true. And yet you have people from all different countries and cultures, and they all sort of, once they get here, become part of this theoretically monolithic Spanish-speaking culture. But of course, they're not. It's varied. And on the other hand, it starts to take on its own kind of community, its own version of identity.
Yeah.
of people who have a natural, native relationship with Spanish and they live here.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of what that means? Do you identify with that?
I do, definitely. I mean, in the sense that there's some maybe like a common denominator in Latin American culture that I guess regardless of where in that whole, geographic territory, there is some, an underlying kind of attitude towards life, I guess, which at the same time could be a huge generalization because even in Chile, you have people that think very differently about life, and we're all Latinos,
right.
Yeah, I guess also there's some kind of a innate communion of Latin American people when they're outside in like a foreign, maybe like a North American or like European environment, because I guess there we can actually maybe more easily point out like how this geography, maybe culture, ancestry or whatever determines a little bit of your personality and the way that you interact with each other. Yeah, when you're around Latin American people, like you can tell, there's some, I guess there's some kind of idea of maybe warmth. We used to talk about in these terms, which doesn't mean that North Americans aren't, but like, and yeah, I guess also being from what they used to call third world countries, there's some kind of like communion again in the struggle, in the idea that like there's some stuff that you had to go through that I totally get it, And on top of that, a lot of our countries also have had similar histories, from different points of view, but like the political stories are quite similar.
I mean, have you stayed in touch with the music scene in Santiago? Do you go back enough that you kind of know what it feels like?
Well, yeah, I try to go like once a year. Sometimes I get to go twice. There's some musicians that actually come here to visit, and then there's always more than can be done. Sometimes you get so busy and then suddenly, you haven't contacted your friends in a long time. But I do go there, and there's like a particular places too that like, have the music that like happens there, so I go there and last year I played 2 nights, and musicians show up, and then we catch up, and then I've also developed a kind of like a Chilean band too when I go there, play with people from Santiago.
Do you get a sense that the music that you're making here, with all of its references from all of your background, is having an impact there, that people are hearing it and responding to it?
I do receive a lot of comments, like, kind of little messages on my email or,
Social
Instagram
media,
or whatever. Yeah, of like, and also young musicians, kind of like musicians I don't even know, telling me like how they're sort of inspired by it. And it makes me feel so humble too, because like, that is crazy. Yeah, I mean, time is going by, and you're now an older musician, kind of paving a way for others, and it's crazy. Time flies.
And especially as a woman, and it just occurred to me, and I know I had thought about this before, is how old is Melissa Aldana?
Maybe 31.
So I shouldn't ask. I shouldn't phrase the question that way. But she's Chilean also, right?
Yep.
And she's your generation.
Yeah.
2 notable Chilena jazz musician living in New York. That's kind of amazing, actually.
Yeah, very synchronic in a way. I remember, it's funny because we actually got to really meet each other in America because she was super young when she left. She was like 18, 19 or something. And she left to Berkeley. Oh, actually, in that trip that I talked about, like coming to New York, I did contact her, like, hey, we're coming, we're coming. And she's like, come visit me at Berkeley. She's always like so open. We didn't know each other so much, but then she's like, come stay with me. And then we did go to jam sessions. We did sessions. We did everything. And then when she moved to New York, I was already here. And we started just like literally saving our asses the whole time, like I would call her for a gig, she would call me for another, and like, you know, recommend each other to everybody. And yeah, it was kind of like a fellowship.
Do you feel that there's space opening for women in jazz that there wasn't before? Has it ever been a challenge for you to be playing jazz as a woman?
Yeah, well, funny that you asked related to the previous answer, because, I mean, you will never really understand if certain things that happen are actually because you're a woman or not. But I remember when we visited Melissa, I visited Melissa and then we went to this jam session. It seemed that it was like the four like machos, you know, of the town, you know, like the little town of Boston. At that time, I think if you're the best at Berkeley, you think that you're the best in the world. So we went to this jam session and we said, can we play, you know? Yeah, we'll call you. Literally, everybody went in and then they never called us, like never. We ended up leaving, you know, it was kind of frustrating. I think Melissa mentioned something, that's because we're women or something. At that moment might have said something like that, but we'll never know. At the same time, I think I just don't feel that the things that happen to me, you know, when I feel that I've been disadvantaged on certain parts or that I failed or that I didn't get this, I never really blame it on anything else, you know? I might be wrong, but yeah, it could be so many things, you know? But today we're seeing absolutely like a specific moment in time, at least in my time, where we are so aware of the inequalities maybe, or the unawareness, you know, when it comes to where do we put our attention, you know, or who do we lift, or who do we listen to? Even when we think about history, you know, like what did like the people that wrote this history decide to make history about? And suddenly, like, I realized that, whoa, there's all these like female jazz players that I never learned about, you know? And you're like, let's reconsider everything now, you know? So I love that these voices are being like uplifted now, you know? We can have a new and more whole picture of our society, of our evolution, you know?
Well, I think those are, you know, there's two questions there. One is revisiting the past and looking for people that have been overlooked because they weren't given the opportunity. You know, revisiting the canon and deciding to introduce some new players into that canon that we think about. And that, but the other is this moment now where I think there are just also maybe more women playing the music.
Oh,
you know,
absolutely, yeah. And I've seen so many new players just on every instrument, on every field.
You know, one thing that you have, independent of being a woman, is that you play and you sing. Do you define or identify with one more than the other? You said when you were starting, you've really identified as a guitar player.
Yeah.
But what about today?
No, today it feels like a total, it's like almost like one instrument.
How would it feel to play and not sing?
It happens sometimes, and it's totally fine, you know? Yeah. But somehow there's some kind of a feeling of completion when I'm doing both, you know? Especially because, I don't know, I feel like I sing differently or I play differently when I'm not, you know, with one or another. You might have heard also, like, I love singing when I solo too, you know? It really gives a different sound, you know?
Does it change the ideas that you play or sing when you do them together? Like, do you simplify?
I feel like I started doing this because I love the sound, but also to force myself to really hear more what I was playing.
Yes.
Because the guitar has this intrinsic form where it's so easy to just play by memory.
Yes.
You know, like you just remember shapes.
Yes.
And so it would just not be fun to play like that. You know, it would be like, what's the point of just moving my fingers? So this exercise of like trying to sing, at the very beginning, it was almost impossible, you know, because I wasn't really hearing. Yeah. You know, I wouldn't even like get the interval right. But then slowly, gaining more of like a comprehension of the distances of the notes, and also the next layers of music, like the dynamics and the inflections. Like it would make my guitar playing so much more like singable in a sense, that's what really I was enjoying to hear from myself.
Well, there's that sort of old idea that, you should try to play melodies that you could sing, that people could sing. In fact, maybe that's part of what you thought was so incredible when you found out that jazz was improvised,
Right.
That you mean they improvised something that I could sing along with?
Wow. Yeah. I remember transcribing a Wes Montgomery solo, and then I would like sing it, over it. It was crazy how melodically smart it was, It almost felt like it was composed on how beautifully voice-led everything was. It was like, whoa, I want to be able to do this. It's funny because I guess all the ideas one have, at one point they'll be confronted with the opposite.
What do you mean?
That like I've sort of like preached to myself about this singable thing. And right now, I'm kind of interested in trying to find things that are hard to sing. But which I guess it doesn't really oppose each other. It's not like an opposite. It's just like maybe the idea of what's singable is what I want to start challenging,
It's like what's beautiful.
Right.
By taking a beautiful song and reharmonizing it and saying, how do you feel now? That's what you said, right? How do you feel now when I change this? How do you feel now? How do I feel now when I reharmonize a song?
Right.
Is it still beautiful? And if not, is that bad?
Right.
I don't know. What have I not asked you about that we should talk about before we wrap this up?
Ooh, this was a rich interview. I loved it. I feel good about it.
I feel great about it.
Yeah.
Camila Meza, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun talking with you.
For me too.
Yeah.
There it was, my friends, Camila Meza. Just some conversations you just don't want to end. Some of them you just want to keep having. You just want to keep going with it. And we talked all the talk, but you get the sense that there was a lot more to cover still, and we could have talked for another hour, another couple of hours. I'll be back again soon with another deep dive. Until then, I'll talk to you soon.